Today's show is part two of our conversation with Darrel Coulter, where we continue to talk about getting pitchers to understand how to pitch.
Welcome to another episode of the Baseball Awakening Podcast, where we dive into the raw, unfiltered, unsexy side of player development. Get ready for some knowledge bombs with your host, Geoff Rottmayer.
Welcome to the Baseball Awakening Podcast. I'm Geoff Rottmayer, and today we continue our conversation with Darrel Coulter of STARTTPitching.com. Again, that's STARTTPitching.com. Darrel, yesterday we ended the conversation talking about using information to help you get guys out. And what we have to remember is this has to be coached into guys. And you say, hey, watch the game, but a lot of times they don't really know what they're looking at. So you have to coach them. You have to get them to understand what they're looking at. And because there's a lot more to the game than just the results, like you said yesterday. You know, it can be an information overload, but if you start small, anything will help you get better than you are today.
No question. And what happened is whenever, and it's kind of the old attention theory, whatever we pay attention to seems like that's the most important thing. And we start seeing things that we never saw before. Once we can convince these guys to start watching games, not like a fan, but like I'm the guy that's trying to identify some kind of habit, pattern, tendency that can give us some kind of information or intellectual advantage. Now the game just becomes my mastered pitches, and then which pitch do I throw in this situation and count? So we're taking that information, and I tell you what, Geoff, I tell them all the time, man, I want guys that were quarterbacks. And they say, why? Because I say the best NFL quarterbacks are the ones that do the game day, that do game film study. The ones that can study game film, the ones that see the cues and clues of the defenses, because the biggest bust in the NFL draft, it wasn't because they weren't physically capable. The problem they were having was reading defenses. It was really studying game film and identifying, having that kind of sense to be able to see these cues and clues and then understand those cues and clues in real time. So now when they broke the hoe or they're in the shotgun and they have to read the defense right there in real time, they're looking for cues and clues from the linebackers, from the strong safety. What coverage are they rolling into? And that cue and clue is going to give that quarterback the ability to pick the right place to throw the ball, or whether they're going to run a pass option or whatever it's going to be. But it's all based on this guy's being able to study game film. That's why Drew Brees so good. Tom Brady's so good. They're not only physically gifted, but dude, they study film. They understand cues and clues. They see patterns and habits and tendencies of defenses, and then they see it when they're bluffing it. And so what it comes down to, Geoff, is decision making, man. So when these pitchers in the minor leagues are super talented pitchers, it really comes down to how they choose what pitch they're going to throw and why they're throwing it. And I told one of my guys the other day, and a coach the other day, if you want to know something honestly about your pitchers, take them in an environment where they don't feel like you're questioning or threatening them, and honestly ask them, dude, how do you choose what pitch you're going to throw? And again, man, I do it to pro guys all the time. How do you choose what pitch you're going to throw? What information are you basing that on? And man, seriously, if it goes silent or they just look at you, that's a clue, man. That's a clue that they don't intellectually understand. They're just calling what the catcher calls. If they got a great catcher, they do all right. If they don't have a very good catcher, or a catcher, a young catcher, then they struggle because they're just basing it off of baseball patterns and habits and tendencies that really have no direct correlation to that individual pitcher or that individual hitter, or why that pitcher would throw a pitch that they have mastered against that hitter. Does that make sense, man?
Yeah, that makes sense. So now we got a guy that was drafted, and he's got, let's just say, a power fastball, but that's all he's got. And so he calls you and goes through your process, which include you asking him what pitches he has. And he says, I got a fastball, curveball, changeup, but for whatever reason, I can't locate my changeup or my curveball. So I rely way too much on my fastball. And this is something that we see a lot. So how does that conversation go?
You know what I do, Geoff? I take them right back to the idea assessment. Do they intellectually understand how to throw a changeup? We know if they throw 95 miles an hour, we know they're physically capable of throwing a changeup. So a lot of times, I think that's why we see all these pitch grip videos and all this other crazy stuff that goes on. The truth is, man, it's a trust factor. A kid that can throw 94, 95, man, I had the same problem. I was a younger guy. I threw hard. I didn't want to throw off-speed pitches. I didn't trust off-speed pitches. That's the only reason I didn't want to throw them. And then when I got into pro ball and I needed a changeup, it's probably the biggest regret I have in pro baseball. In 1988, man, I was playing. We won the South Atlantic League championship, and in our postseason exit interviews, the coach said, "Hey, man, I love the way you pitch, man, because I looked like the bat boy. I was like 5'11", 150 pounds, and I could throw 91, 92, had a good curveball, but I needed a straight changeup. But you know what, man? I just never trusted it. And there was people that I could have went home to. There was a former big league pitching coach that lived in my community, man, and you know what? I just never had the guts enough to go ask him. I felt like if at 20, that if I went and admitted I didn't know how to do something, that all of a sudden that would be like a sign of weakness. And you know what, man? I think that same attitude permeates so many minor league players. They feel like since they're a pro baseball player that all this stuff they ought to already know. And the truth is we don't. We got the physical capability and talent, but the truth is nobody's ever really gave us permission to sit here and throw a changeup grip enough to master the understanding of the feel, the grip pressure, and how that pitch ought to move, to where we can honestly take an off season and just master that pitch. And so,
I love how you talk about it's more of a trust thing than it is, the normal default of the mechanics. Yes. But no, you need to go out there, you need to throw more, you need to get comfortable, and you need to see what your pitchers are doing.
We got to give it an image and a pattern and an experience, man. That's what everything is in life that we deal with. Every pitch that we throw, every reason we decide the pitch to throw is based on an image of what we think that pitch is going to do, a pattern of what it should feel like so our brain can trust it, and then an experience. Whatever emotional label we gave it. The last time I pitched against that guy, I threw that curveball and hammered him, struck him out. That felt good. I label it as good. Next time he steps in the box, I'm going to challenge him with my fastball until he proves that he can hit it. And see, that is it. So the decision-making process was based on my experience of his last at-bat against me. But if I seen him in the back of the box the last at bat and I blew him away, and then all of a sudden I see him slide up in the box a little bit, then I'm going to challenge him. If I know he can't hit my fastball, then I'm going to go ahead and challenge him in on his hands. I know he can't hit my fastball then. But a lot of times it's those little adjustments like that, Geoff, that is that sense that we have to give these kids permission to trust it. And sometimes when they're developing that, guess what's going to happen? We're going to walk guys. We're going to miss pitches. We're going to lose games. We're going to do all that stuff is going to be part of it. It ain't just something that magically happens one day and I master a changeup in a weekend in a bullpen. There's going to have to be this intellectual understanding and this emotional trust in that pitch so I can go out there and decide that this is the best pitch for me to throw in this situation and count. And at the end of the day, that's pitching. It's the decision-making that these guys make when they're standing on the rubber. Everything else is just an event or a circumstance that got them to that point. But ultimately, Geoff, pitching comes down to the decisions that these guys make when they're standing on the rubber and that catcher puts the sign down, and the amount of confidence that they have that they can execute that pitch by velocity and movement to that location. And that's what pitching becomes. And it's not a perfect science, man. But I can tell you one thing, we can't take the emotion out of it. We can't take the mental part out of it because that's all part of it. It's all part of it. And so when we go ahead and give these guys permission to be intellectual and to be emotional and to trust it, and that don't mean out of control. It just means I understand the role that it plays and how much it impacts my decision-making when I'm standing on the rubber. And once the guys that get that, Geoff, that is the aha moment. that's when they finally feel like, holy cow, and I see guys can go from A ball to the big league camp in 1 year.
Yeah.
It happens.
So let me ask you this. So you got let's use one of your guys for an example. Bad outings happen. They just happen. No, you don't have your stuff that one day or whatever, your strategy's not working, whatever. What they call you and say, hey, just didn't have it. And then there's a little bit of baseball is very emotional. So you're going to have a little bit of self-doubt, especially when, you got all these guys you're competing with, and maybe you're in Double-A knocking on the door and you're like, man, I just blew it. But what's that conversation like?
You know what? The first question is literally, what were you thinking when you were standing on the rubber getting a sign from the catcher? What was you thinking, man? I mean, is it something that you're focused on your mechanics, which is an autopilot skill, I call it. Pros mechanics got to be on autopilot. If you're out there consciously thinking about your mechanics, then you're not pitching. Mechanics is an autopilot thing. It's an unconscious, subconscious thing that happens based on the information that we tell ourselves. We know we're a pitcher. We know this is the movement pattern of our pitches. And so when that catcher puts a sign down, I'm making a conscious choice to throw this pitch, and I'm trusting that my brain and my body will do what I tell it to do. See, that's mechanics, man. That's real mechanics. At the end of the day, if you're consciously deciding that mechanics is the reason you're throwing this pitch, then you ain't pitching. That's not strategic pitching. And so we got to go back, and sometimes it's in pro ball, you have it all the time. You got these roving pitching instructors that come in and just give you a little bit of tip or advice. And what happens is, and it might be the right advice, but what happens is you give it way too much weight. You think that if I don't do this right now, if I don't lift my knee up 2 inches higher and get a little bit more into my back leg, then they're not going to call me to the big leagues. And that's how it is, man. As goofy as it sounds, when you're down there in the middle of it and it's so emotional and it's so competitive and you're in that convince and compare mindset, then you honestly think, holy cow, if I just get my leg lift right, then this guy's going to help me get to the big leagues. Even though we know it's not true, that's the story we tell ourselves. And so what happens is you get to hang on every word that these guys say. And a lot of these guys might have been giving you good advice. It just wasn't meant to be that literal. It was just about getting in a better position or getting in better timing or rhythm, tempo, and timing into your movement pattern. And so what happens is these guys honestly go out there and in the game, they're trying to do what these guys have suggested to them. And again, that's one of those things that I tell these guys all the time. If you're going to make a legit mechanical change in a pitcher, anytime you do that in season, especially in pro ball, it's not going to work. Now, you'll see guys say, oh, they made this little tweak or do whatever. But when you take a guy that's really struggling with pitch command, and he's really struggling with the ability to locate anything, then that is a decision-making problem. That is not a mechanical issue. And most of these guys, it's like you said a while ago, that's the default excuse for why I'm not throwing. But most of the time, the reason they're struggling is the decision-making or what they're consciously thinking about while they're standing on the rubber. If they're consciously thinking about an autopilot skill, then we're in trouble because they're not consciously focusing on what is the best pitch to throw in this situation and count. And so that mindset shift right there is enough sometimes. But at the same time, Geoff, it's like we talked earlier. If they're still in this convince and compare mindset and they haven't switched into this compete and contribute mindset, then it's fruitless because the natural default for the convince and compare is to go back to mechanics, go back to physical, because that's what I've been comparing myself to these guys about my whole life. And so that's the toughest piece, the most frustrating piece for these minor league guys that I deal with. They got the physical ability to pitch in the big leagues. They just don't have the decision making down based on what they understand about their pitches and what they understand about the hitter they're facing. And again, it's not a perfect science, but there is a mindset that goes with that, because when the brain thinks that you got a strategy and that you can intellectually, emotionally, and physically execute that strategy, then it's going to be a lot more confident to let you go ahead and execute that pitch that you decide to throw. And so there's neuroscience that back it up that we see, and we execute what we see and feel. That's the truth. And if you can't see it and feel it, then the brain's going to slow down. And I try to tell these guys all the time, most pro guys that I see don't have mechanic issues. They have indecision issues. And when they start having indecision issues, the brain will slow the body down because it's going to go into that fight or flight mindset. And so now when you start having questions out there, when you're the center of attention and you're the pitcher and you got everybody watching you, that additional pressure in that environment, when you start having indecision issues, the brain is going to slow the body down and start really asking you whether you really want to do this. And that's why you see it, man. It's emotional to be a pitcher, man. It takes more than just positive self-talk. It takes an understanding that you got a plan, man. And if you get out there and you don't have a plan, brother, you're going to struggle. That's just reality.
Right. And the whole trusting people part, that's one of the things where you just got to keep that circle small. And there are guys all the time, like you just said, the roving instructor who has no clue who I am, but
yep.
he may be perceived to have the ticket. And you just have to be careful with who you're listening to and make sure that they understand who you are.
And that's human, Jeff. That's just human. It's just human, man. We all want to play for guys that like us. And I try to explain this to coaches all the time, man. Every one of us has either worked for somebody or played for somebody that no matter what you did, it seemed like they were never happy. And at the end of the day, you can, if you got the personality that you really don't care, you just leave it at the park. You just don't care. I play for me. I don't care about them. If he's a miserable old fool, that's fine. But if you're somebody that cares and you value their opinion or advice, or you think that they carry some weight to get to a goal that you want, all of a sudden now we feel like it's us that's the problem and it's not them. And so we try, Justin, we try to constantly change and tweak and screw with stuff so we never do get to that mastery phase. So when you always feel like something's missing, you never get to mastery. Your brain never honestly feels that you got this pitch mastered, that you could throw this in any situation account, or you could throw it in the right situation account anytime you needed to. See, that's why we got to get to physical capabilities. And once these guys get to their max physical capabilities, then we got to pitch inside of our limitations. And that don't mean that we're limited in what we can do. It just means that we intellectually understand that my two-seam fastball is 92 to 94. It's going to move like this. So if I'm 0-2, where do I want this ball to end up at? With this velocity, this movement pattern, and this grip to this location. See, now it sounds crazy at first, but when you really start dissecting to what a pitch really is, it's a velocity and movement to a location. And so the more you trust that, and the more you intellectually understand that is the best pitch to throw in that situation and count, and you ain't fearful of some emotional consequence to a negative outcome, that's where we get these confident bulldog. You see these guys we love pitching, Verlanders and Kershaws and Greinke. These guys are intellectually and emotionally tough, but they're bulldogs. You know why? Because they have no fear of the emotional consequence. They're pitching because they know strategically this is the absolute best pitch to throw in this situation and count. That don't mean the outcome is going to be what they want it to be, but when it comes to the decision-making process, Jeff, that it was based on their understanding of themselves, that hitter, and this is the absolute best pitch for me to throw in this count. And when you do that, you can live with the outcome regardless of what happens. That's what we need to teach these guys, man. That's what we need to teach them.
Right, I agree. So let me ask you about personalities. Everyone has different personalities. For your guy, do you use like a personality assessment to kind of gauge, how they are, and what are your thoughts on that?
I think personality is just that. I think the value that we give it is the emphasis that the kid is going to believe it. If we go in and tell them that personality matters, I think there's a difference between personality and culture. See, the one thing I do want coaches to control is the culture, the communication, the character, how we're going to treat each other, the respect that every teammate is usually looking for when they want to play on a team. There's three emotional things that I look for. Why do they play? Is it for respect, recognition, or rewards? And when I can identify that, the respect is usually the guys that just want to be on the team. They're good with it. They just, once they make the team, they just want to be respected for that they made the team. Now, what we want them to do is to go into this respect piece of it, but we gradually want them to move into the recognition and the rewards phase. As they start taking more and more responsibility, then we want them to be in that recognition phase where the coach recognizes that, hey, I need you to start in left field today. You're doing this. You're playing well. See, that's the second emotional factor that most of these kids are wanting to play for. They want the recognition. They want people to recognize that their hard work is turned into an opportunity to play. And then what we end up with, hopefully at the end of the day, is a group of leaders that are in this reward phase. They're not playing for respect. They're not playing for recognition. They've already got both of those. What they're playing for is to lead the team. Those are the guys that we want that's going to go out here and with the game on the line, they're the ones that's going to want the baseball. They're the ones that's going to want the bat. They're the ones that's going to carry it. And they're on every team in the world. I don't care what anybody else says. There's those people that they don't even play for the money. Literally, they play just for that opportunity, just for that reward, just for that. And that is where they get their intellectual reward from it. Their emotional reward don't come from the outcome. It comes from that opportunity to be in that situation and to know that it's on them to go out there and execute and make it happen. And so when we're developing young players, they're going to be in one of those three phases if they honestly are playing for the right reasons. So personalities can be fine as long as we communicate well, we don't disrespect each other, and as long as we got character that the coach is influencing in that, then we can start sitting and really giving the kids the individual attention that they need. We can start identifying specific things. That's why I don't like these cookie cutter practice plans, because a lot of times we're just sending these kids through this practice plan just so we can manage the kids, and we're not really individually developing each one based on where they're at and what they need in that time. And I think today there's so many good resources out there that the ability for coaches that really want to understand it on how to help the individual player, then it's there. But it's got to be based on what that young player thinks they need, and then where they're at intellectually with that information. Then we can sit here and give them all the philosophies in the world. As long as they buy into it, we're cool. But if they don't buy into it, it don't matter how great you think your philosophy is, it's useless to that kid. And sooner or later, if you got 7 or 8 kids on your team that philosophy is useless for, then it don't matter how brilliant and smart it is. It don't matter how many guys you help get to the big leagues before that. That group of kids that you have right then is the only group of kids that matters. And we can't just wash your hands and walk away from it. But I think conversations like we're having today, I hear it from coaches now. I hear coaches that are really getting into it. You see Joe Madden and these guys that are great managers based on their relationships. It's not that they don't know baseball. It's that they build a relationship. They build that trust factor. They get to know the players on a real level, not only personally, but as a baseball player. And then they can see the little things that they can chip in and help with, strategically help these guys with. But these guys, the best Major League players, have went from this convince and compare mindset to this compete and contribute mindset. So now their preparation is purely based on them going out and competing against the best players in the world, and how do they contribute to their team. And those are the players that Major League decision makers love. Those are the players that Major League managers love. And I tell them all the time, man, you'll go to the big leagues when that manager and GM's willing to get fired for you. And so what our job is to prove to them that you're Major League ready while you're pitching in the minor leagues.
Yeah, and it would be nice for a guy to kind of get out of that compare and convince mindset and just do themselves. You know, I tell guys all the time, just do you, man, do yourself, and it's going to be a lot less stressful.
That's it, man. And I think that's the key. If you had to pin me down and say, hey, man, what is the one key to a college pitcher or a pro pitcher success? I would say it was having that mindset shift from this convince and compare to this compete and contribute, because convince and compare is about where you're at physically and what everybody else is doing. That compete and contribute is really individualized. It's about what do you got to do to compete right then in that moment in that game. So it's not just big picture view. It's really personal and intimate. So when it becomes personal and intimate, then we're a lot more apt to look at what we can do and what we can't do, and taking the things we can do and figuring out a strategy to go use it to win a game, to go get a hitter out, to go do the things. That's the mindset that I want these guys to have. I want them to believe that they got the physical capability, but I want them to turn that capability into a pitch mastery. I want them to find 2 or 3 pitches that they've mastered that they can throw consistently by velocity and movement to a location. And now let's create a strategy with those pitches to go out there and get the hitter out. And that's, to me, that's the art of pitching, brother, right there.
Right. I agree. So now you got a guy that you are working with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's a young guy, college guy, A-ball, whatever. You know, he's gone through your process. And he says, yeah, you know, I'm going to do X, Y, Z to improve X, Y, Z. But it seems like every time you guys talk or anytime you guys connect, the conversation never really is the same. It never really goes anywhere. So what's that like?
You know what I found over the last 13 years of doing this, and now I've talked, interviewed, worked with, you know, almost 300 D1 and minor league guys. And the conversation is usually based on 2 things. One is they truly don't intellectually understand it, and they don't want to admit it. They bobblehead because that's what we're conditioned to do as players. Most of the time we're pleasers. We just want to make the coach happy. We just want, and especially in the minor leagues where you think that coach has got some impact on whether you move up. And so we become pleasers. We just try to do whatever they tell us to do. And the biggest question I get from first-time calls when I do these, I do confidential consulting calls. And when I talk to them, the first question, you know what they want, man? I wish somebody would just tell me what I needed to do. If I've heard that once, Jeff, I've heard that 200 times, literally. Just tell me what I need to do. And so what that tells me right off the bat is that now they think the reason they're not in the big leagues is because they don't know what to do. Which seems kind of Captain Obvious, but the reality of it is, if we break it down a little deeper, Jeff, it's because of the decision making. They don't trust their decision making when they're picking what pitch to throw. They really don't believe, maybe, or they question it, or they have a little indecision on whether that is the best pitch to throw in this situation and count. And if they're worried about what that coach is going to think or what the organization is going to think if they give up a hit right now, then you can't pitch like that. You can't pitch with certainty and go out there and the brain pitch with that kind of pressure, because it's not real pressure. It's pressure based on a lack of knowledge, not pressure based on situation and circumstance. And that's frustrating. The second piece of it is I have that when kids are doing what the organization told them to do and they're changing the kids. When they come in and this kid's confidence is based on this process, this program. And that's why it's so hard, man, with all these great trainers out here and different strength conditioning guys and throwing programs and all this stuff. And if you draft a kid that his confidence is built in that training program or that recovery program, and now you take that kid and you put him into a pro organization who says, we don't do that here. Now, intellectually and emotionally, this kid feels like he's starting all over again. And so I tell a lot of coaches that, hey man, these kids are not clay, that you're the potter. You know, at the end of the day, you're getting the jar. It is what it is. Now, what you do with that jar is up to you and what that kid thinks. But they're not just a lump of clay. Just because they're a great athlete don't mean that you can come in and they're not intellectual and emotional beings, that I'm just going to morph them into this. I'm going to shape them into who I want to do. That is maybe the biggest myth in minor league development, is that these guys think that I can just draft these super talented athletes and I can mold them into these players. Man, that rarely ever works, because you got to have the intellectual and emotional connection. If you don't have this intellectual interest and understanding, and if you don't have this emotional connection and investment, then all the physical talent in the world is just that. It's just physical capability. But it don't translate into a specific sport, and especially pitching, into some fine gross motor skill ability. And now all of a sudden, intellectually, I'm going to magically just pick the right pitch to throw in every situation and count. That's just crazy. But that's kind of what we've left it up to. And then, and again, man, I'm not being harsh on these guys, but the prerequisite guys, when we get to the prerequisite, the scout skills, the developmental stuff, all the stuff that's on the internet right now for sale is all prerequisite stuff. This is, it's again, that's what I tell these guys. It's like having the 35 on your ACT if you want to get into Stanford or Harvard. You got to have 35, 36. If not, man, everybody that's trying to get in there is right in that range. But that ACT is not going to get you a master's degree from Harvard. You're going to have to go earn that thing. You're going to have to go do the work. You're going to have to go put in the time. And so that's what we think, though. If I just throw 94 miles an hour, then, yeah, it might get you into that school, but it's not going to go out there and get you a weekend starter job. It's not going to get you a call to the big leagues. We gotta intellectually understand what we're doing, and we got to have some deeper emotional connection, because the game is so hard, Geoff, that if we don't have that interest in that connection, then, man, whenever we start getting hit hard or we get rocked or we start playing against guys that are just as good or better than us, then we're going to intellectually not be interested enough to take that next step, that growth step that I have to do to become strategic. And so usually these guys tap out at whatever their physical capability is. Most of the time it's rookie ball or A ball, and they never do make that strategic change. And so a lot of times it's not about adding velocity or doing something different with their pitches. It's about mastering what they can do and then having a strategy to get that hitter out. And what happens then is the brain takes a different approach to pitching. Now it's not in that convince and compare mindset. It's in that compete and contribute mindset, which is a lot more tribal, a lot more organization, team driven in. The outcome is based on me and my team competing and how I contribute to the team. And that's what sets us free, that it's not about me being individually judged anymore in that convince and compare mindset. It's more about how do I compete and contribute and help my team win, which is what every organization and coach wants. But we got to give these kids permission to get there. And if we keep comparing them with their physical skills against each other, then they're never going to get to that point where, okay, this is my skill level, this is my capability. How do I master my pitches within that capability? And then how do I read and study hitters, read the umpire that day, see what they're calling, and how do I decide what pitch I'm going to throw in every situation and count? That's the game changer, man. That's how we're going to take it to not only pro ball to the next level, but we're going to be able to help these younger high school and college guys that are starting to hit their physical maturity level, that they can see the game differently. And we're going to have better athletes that want to play, because now we've put the compete and contribute piece back into it. It's not just this physical capability contest anymore.
Receive a Baseball Awakening decal by subscribing on iTunes and leaving an objective review. To claim your decals, screenshot the review and email it to Geoff@baseballawakening.com. That's GEOFF@baseballawakening.com, and we'll get that your way.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Routines. Let's talk routines. How important are they?
I love routines. I think there's aspects of the game that we need to be routine, that we want to drill. So I'm not against working on mechanics. It's just got to be in the right time. I'm not against that. I want this, but I want any movement pattern that we're trying to automate or we're trying to make instinctive, that we want it to be on autopilot. And so when we have this piece of it, so if there's an instinctive way that we move, and then we train, and there's so many great biomechanical stuff and measurements that these trainers and PTs and these guys can do, that they can find muscle inefficiency, deficiencies, hyper and hypo, all these different things that they can do with these kids to individually help them be as strong and stable as they can, which is a great thing. And I think the sooner that we do that with younger players, the sooner that we start giving that mindset to these kids that, hey, this is about me individually continuing to mature physically into the young man I'm going to be. So once we keep the physical development piece straight, but I think what happens now is we start judging that physical development and we start labeling these kids. Here's a velocity kid, here's a command kid. Here's a velocity kid and command kid. And the only difference between the two is one of them is more physically developed than the other one. Has nothing to do with pitching. Has everything to do with physical capability at that point in time that we're taking the snapshot. But what happens intellectually and emotionally is when we start labeling these kids and we start telling them that, they start believing it. So all of a sudden now, when we get to high school and we really need these kids to do both, we need them to intellectually grow and understand how to master their pitches and how to get hitters out, and we need them to physically continue to develop and grow, then we got to be able to sync those two together. We can't divide those two. And I think that's the piece that, that we see in sports today. That, and again, we can go back to the quarterback analogy, that Drew Brees is a great physical quarterback. He's not 6'5", but he's got all the physical capabilities he needs, but he understands his limitations, and his strengths is in reading defenses and making the right choice of where to deliver the ball to. And so that is a process that he learned over a course of learning how to study hitters or study defenses. And when we see that piece of it, he can start looking for the cues and clues. It ain't like he's learning the whole other team's defense every week, but he knows that there's a fundamental situation they're going to be in. And so when he comes in up by down in distance, he has a pretty good idea of how that defense is going to line up. So he sees this foundational formation that the defense is going to be. Now he's looking for little cues and clues out of individual players on that defense that's going to give him a clue or a signal to what they're going to do. Same way with pitching, man. And we can teach this in high school and college, but we gotta change the conversation from this convince and compare mindset and get into this compete and contribute mindset. And we got to get more individual, Geoff, into that. And so until we do that, then, and again, man, I try to tell these guys that pitching or baseball is a paradox sport, man. It's an individual team sport. There's a team aspect to it, but truthfully, there's 9 players out there, all in different positions, all got different roles and responsibilities, and they train each one of those positions individually. You don't train pitchers to be a third baseman. You don't train third baseman to be an outfielder. They got specific things that they do just for that position. And so we got to train players like that. We got to train them almost like golfers or tennis players. We got to take their strengths and their capabilities, and we got to show them how they can take what they're capable of and use it in a competitive environment, use it in a way that gives them a strategic advantage. And that's why I call it the strategy gap. I think that's what's missing. It has nothing to do with physical capability and talent. I think it has to do with individual strategy and what that pitcher is honestly thinking when he's standing on the rubber getting a sign from the catcher. And I think at the end of the day, if I was running a pro organization, that's the one question I'd be asking my pitchers every day. And it wouldn't be judgmental. It would be honestly where I want to intellectually understand why they think that. Do they trust a pitch way more than they should? Are they putting too much reliance in this pitch in one situation to count, or they throw this pitch every 2-2 count? See, those are the habits and patterns and tendencies that good hitters pick up on. And so, again, all of us have them, but a lot of times if we're having success, we don't pay no mind to it. And that's something I tell these pro guys too all the time, man. I've never seen them take a pitcher that was pitching just lights out and change his mechanics. Even though they might think this guy has got the jacked up, this dysfunctional looking mechanics ever, if he's getting dudes out consistently and he's pitching well, they are not changing that guy, no matter how bad they think his mechanics are. And so, again, man, at the end of the day, it comes down to getting hitters out. If you're getting hitters out, you can do it in the ugliest ways ever, and some coach will love you for it, and that's okay. But at the same time, as long as we're using these scout measurements and these scouting reports, and that's the physical measurements that we're using, then we're going to get that type of kid. And the kids that intellectually are interested and are emotionally invested and can get into that compete and contribute mindset are the ones that end up making it to the big leagues.
Let's talk about routine and let's talk about routines in terms of, like on waking up on game days. And
sure. Yeah. Well, that's the gist of what I do. I call it STARTT, man. It's STARTT. It's specific thoughts and actions required today and tomorrow. And so what I try to get these guys to do is I call them daily think sheets. is I want them to get up and focus on specifically just what they need to do today. And we cover all four aspects, the intellectual piece of it, the emotional piece of it, the mental piece of it, and the physical piece of it. And so within those concepts, what do we need to do today to make sure that we're moving the ball forward? We're doing what we need to do, and that's in season, off season, and preseason. And so what it does is it just gives them a structure based on how much sleep they get. What are they eating? And so we can start honestly measuring and tracking and testing what is the best foods for them, what is the right amount of sleep for them. And again, there's sometimes, especially in the minor leagues, when you're on buses a lot, you can't control all that stuff. But what it does, it lets us start seeing that here's the tendencies that I have. When I have 7.5 hours sleep and I eat at 8 o'clock in the morning and I do this at 2 o'clock, and then I go into my pregame routine, that is what I need to do to get my subconscious ready for me to go out there and intellectually and emotionally and physically pitch the game today.
Yeah, I try to get some quality time with our guys on routines and getting them to understand the value of it. And it can be kind of a tough sell for a younger guy, but it's worth mentioning over and over and over until they get it, because once they get it, then they start to find consistency.
No question. And I think we got to give them time to adjust. I think sometimes, and I'm guilty of it, I throw the whole kitchen sink at these guys, and I have information overload, and that's 100% my fault. That's not their fault. I just want to, but we want to start with maybe our sleep habits, then move into our nutritional habits, and you just kind of slowly do this. But I think what happens is the habits and routines match the level of success they're having, and vice versa. The more success they have, the better their habits and routines get, because they start looking for habits and patterns and tendencies of why I was successful. And so I think some of it is just a conversation. It's not just a habit to be a habit, and it's not just a habit because that's what we need to do. It's a habit because strategically that's what helps me prepare to go pitch today. And so that's what we base it on. And so there's a lot of times we have to filter out stuff that I say, hey, man, if you can't tell me honestly how that's helping you be a more strategic pitcher or how it's helping you stay capable and healthy, then we've really got to question why we're wasting time on it. Because the brain is neutral. The brain only measures what we put into it. It only takes it, it only labels what we label it. It only gives value to what we give value to. And if you don't think that your routine and habits has anything to do with your pitching success, then they're not going to do it. If they think that it has everything to do with their pitching success, they're going to do it almost to being perfection. And again, both sides of it can be almost too crazy because we want it to be instinctive and true to that pitcher. But it's one of those things that in today's society, man, we want everything today. We want it fast. And I think most scientists and most, neuroscientists will tell you it takes 60 to 70 days to really change a good or create a good habit or a bad habit or to really develop a habit. And so a lot of times we ain't consistent enough to get to that point where it truly does become a part of our mindset on that we think is why we're having success is this routine. And so that's why that's what you guys can do, man. That's what we do. We gotta just be consistent. We gotta get on them. And to be honest with you, Geoff, it's the hardest part of my job because it's not scalable. There's only so many guys you can work with. There's only so many guys that you can, hours in the day that you can try to help. And within that, I think there's the ability for coaches to manage that, but they're going to have to work together with guys like us that are really trying to just help kids get to a point that they can go compete and contribute at any level, at whatever level that their ability will let them go play at. And I hope that that's what baseball turns into. And again, I hope that's what all youth sports turns into, that the kids that are dedicated and committed are the ones that will intellectually be interested, and they'll carry the game forward because they'll carry the right parts of the game forward, and they'll keep it at that competitive level that people want to go watch and play at, man. And that's cool.
Yeah. And the thing that I hope that people who are listening are picking up and realizing is everything the conversation. So it's a conversation. You got to talk. You got to build trust with your players, and you got to have the conversation, whether it's uncomfortable or not.
Yeah, and I think you've nailed it. I think the most important part for us coaches is that we care, that we honestly care about them as a person first. And that's probably the biggest turnoff I have, man, is that the guys that I just don't, that don't feel it, don't get it. That's usually the discernment that hits me, is that truthfully, they don't care. And if they don't care, then man, you ain't fixing that. That's something they have to change. They have to do. You can guide it for a little while, but we waste too much energy on super talented guys that really don't care, instead of focusing on the guys that may be just talented, that do care, that can turn into a super talented pitcher. And so I look for those guys. I look for the guys that maybe that's not riding that physical talent. And again, it goes into the idea assessment. Are they intellectually interested? Can they explain to you how they throw their pitches and why they pick what pitch they throw? I'm telling you, that's the one takeaway. If they don't take nothing away from this podcast, go ask your pitchers why they throw the pitches that they throw. And if they can't honestly, intellectually, and that don't mean they have to break it down kinetically or all the other crazy stuff that's out there today, but they got to have a thought process on why they chose that pitch. But you got to do it. You got to do it in a non-judgmental way. It's got to be more curiously. It's got to be more inquisitive, and it's got to be in the fact that, hey, man, what that will tell you right off the bat is whether this kid's just throwing what the catcher calls and hoping. I call it wishful thinking, because it's not strategic. It's just wishful thinking. And I got minor league guys like that. They have no idea why they throw the pitch they do. They just throw what the catcher calls and hope for the best. And that's not a strategy. That's wishful thinking. And so again, strategy don't have to be perfect. It just needs to be yours. It needs to be personalized. It needs to be based on the pitches that you've mastered and the information that you know about the other team and the hitter you're facing. And then you can make an intellectual choice, an emotional choice on what's the best pitch to throw. And the guys that do that are the ones that have the most success. And that's just as real as it gets, man.
Awesome. Well, listen, Darrell, this has been a great conversation. So let's kind of end it with, if I just got done listening to this conversation, and I'm sitting here saying, geez, this is so much information. It's kind of overwhelming. So what's my action item? What can I do? What can I take away from this conversation that it's starting getting me down the path to helping my pitchers get guys out?
Yeah, first of all, I think for all of us that we have to take a step back and realize that, yeah, there's some physical prerequisites that it takes to be a good pitcher. But at the same time, they're just prerequisites. They ain't the strategic identity of these young players. And we got to stay away from labeling these kids too early. And so, again, I know, I'm not hammering showcases. I'm not into all that. That serves no purpose. We can agree or disagree or love it or hate it. That don't matter. At the end of the day, it's a reality that's happening. There's parents and kids and coaches that want to play and do it, so we need to help them. But the best way to do it, honestly, is to really find out. And I did a program with Paul Reddick that we had some fun, and it was really neat. Paul's a great guy and a really insightful youth coach and does a lot of great things for baseball. And we went through an 8-week program with some of his parents and some of them, and it was based on, do they really know whether their kid honestly wants to play baseball or not? And if they do, then here's what we can do to help. And so that's what I tell every parent, every coach, whether they got 10 kids on a team, they're doing town ball team, or they got a select ball team. Have a good enough relationship with your players that you could go up and ask them, what do they like that's not baseball related? And I do it with my recruiting piece of my program that I do with these guys. I tell them all the time, the first schools that you ought to look at are the schools that you would go to if you wasn't playing baseball. And people are like, what do you mean? I was like, what school would you pick? And you know what? Some kids tell me, I wouldn't even go to college. Okay, then you know what? Go to JUCO. Go somewhere that you don't have the pressure of being a D1 guy that coaches get fired if you suck. You know what I mean? Pick a school and pick a school. And at the end of the day, what it does is it just gets the mindset of the parents and the pitcher right. Let's go to college for the right reason. Let's go to college because of, and it's something that I want to do and that I can add value to that coach and that organization or that team. And then let's do it based on, what do I really want to do with the rest of my life? That baseball is just an avenue to help me either get my school paid for or just another 4-year experience I want to have, or maybe it turns into a Hall of Fame baseball career. But at the end of the day, players play for experiences. Every one of us that coach, we coach for experiences. It's not just a day in, day out grind. That's just part of what we do. We coach so we can see these kids achieve and live out these baseball experiences that only comes from the dedication and the hard work of the guys that really care. And so the things I love most about coaches and parents and that, man, is that they care. The coaches that care, man, we can help them. All the baseball guys out there, all the baseball gurus, geniuses out there, the parents and coaches that really care, we can help them guys. But the ones that don't care, that are only doing it for their own experience, not for the experience that the kids can have and the parents can be a part of and the coaches can be a part of. And so I think what happens is us coaches need to take more of a guide, more of a leader, a mindset to it, an approach to it, instead of it being about us and our philosophy and how many of these kids can I prove that my philosophy is the best philosophy ever in baseball development, and really kind of flip that script around and honestly say, hey, man, what kind of baseball experience are you looking for? And then, based on physical capability and based on intellectual interest and based on emotional connection and based on are they really mentally focused on what they want to do, that kind of gives us the cues and the clues and signals as coaches and scouts and as college coaches and recruiters about those are the kids that are going to have the best opportunity to be successful. And those are the ones that we need to be scouting and recruiting. But we don't need to be hammering 12, 13, 14-year-old kids in the ground and driving them away from baseball because we got to label them before they've even reached puberty. And so that's what I would leave you with, brother. I would tell every parent, youth coach out there, get to know your kids, honestly. Give them a value besides baseball. And honestly, if baseball is their passion and desire and they have the physical capability, then encourage it. But if it's not their passion and desire and they just want to be respected, they just want to play with their friends, then give them a role and responsibility if they're good enough to make your team that fits that respect that they're looking for. But you can't put them in that recognition or reward role because they're going to fail at it. But the only way we know that is if we have real honest conversations with these young men and these young players, and we don't be mean and hateful about it. We're just real about it. And that don't mean that you're insensitive. It just means that when we talk to parents and coaches, we put them in that respect, that recognition, or that reward role, instead of saying you're my starter and you're never going to do nothing but pinch run. Just say, hey, man, they want to be on the team. And when you have that conversation with parents and you ain't charging them insubordinate amount of money and different things about it, Geoff, then we have a lot better relationships, and these kids and these parents have a lot better experiences, and it ends up being fun for coaches too. But I think most coaches struggle because of the experience they create for their players and the atmosphere and the environment that either the parents are controlling the experience or the coach is over controlling the experience. And at the end of the day, we got to let players play. It's got to be fun. It's got to be something they want to do. And the truth of it is if the parents and the coaches try to make it to be the best experience that these players could have every day, then all of us would do a lot better at our jobs at the end of the day.
I agree. And Darrell, I appreciate your time. I learned a lot. Thank you for coming on.
Hey, buddy, I love you, man. I appreciate you. You're doing a great job, man. I'm looking forward to see how this goes for you. And then anytime I can help, brother, you just let me know. I'm glad to do it.
I'm Geoff Rottmayer, and thank you for listening to our conversation on the Baseball Awakening podcast. Stay tuned for our recap show tomorrow.